Okay, let me try this. It's become a bit of a tradition at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy to begin with an apology. So let me begin with two apologies. The first is for being about 5 minutes late in getting started. The second is to apologize on behalf of the Dean, Professor Kishore Mahbubani, who's not able to chair this lecture because of a grueling travel schedule. Only this afternoon he returned from a 12-day trip to Kazakhstan, Germany, Holland, and the United Arab Emirates. So unfortunately, you will then have to make do with me. I am Stavros Yanuka, the Vice Dean responsible for External Affairs, Executive Education, and various other odd jobs. If that sounds a little too complicated, then just think of me as the LKY School's equivalent of Joe the Plumber. Right. Which brings us nicely on to the topic that we're here to discuss. Now, to say that last Tuesday the world witnessed something remarkable is to make a gross understatement. It's not just that the world's sole superpower elected as its president, and here I'm quoting, a skinny guy with a funny name, end quote, against the backdrop of an economy on the verge of ruin and an international reputation more or less in tatters. I think the truly remarkable thing about this election was not just the outcome per se, but the way the whole world seemed to participate and perhaps tellingly rejoice in the result. From Antigua to Zambia and Southampton to Singapore, the world celebrated the election of Barack Obama and embraced the man as if he were one of our own. Now, we're extremely fortunate today at the Lee Kuan Yew School to welcome Dr. Allan Goodman, a truly outstanding scholar and public servant, who will help shed some light on these extraordinary events and answer some pertinent questions. For example, why was this election so different? How did the world events shape the thinking of the American electorate? Perhaps more importantly, what can the rest of the world expect of the new administration? Are we poised for a new era of American leadership, or will the weight of global expectations prove too much for this unlikeliest of presidents? I'm going to restrict myself now to just making 3 points about Dr. Goodman before calling on him to address us this evening. Number one, I think it's fair to say that you've had an extremely distinguished career. Dr. Goodman is currently the president and CEO of the Institute of International Education in New York, a leader in the field of international educational exchange and development training. Prior to this, Dr. Goodman was the executive dean of the School of Foreign Service and a professor at Georgetown University. He also served as a presidential briefing coordinator for the Director of Central Intelligence and as special assistant to the director of the National Foreign Assessment Center during the Carter administration. In the course of his career, he has received many honors and distinctions, such as that of Chevalier of the French Legion of Honor, which was awarded him in April 2007. The second point I'd like to make is that he is a true internationalist. He has the unique distinction of being the first American professor to lecture at the Foreign Affairs College in Beijing. He also helped create the first U.S. academic exchange program with the Moscow Diplomatic Academy and helped develop the diplomatic training program of the Foreign Ministry of Vietnam. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the International Institute for Strategic Studies, and has authored a number of books, including A Brief History of the Future, the United States in a Changing World, which appeared in 1992. Now, my third and final point, and I think the most significant thing about Dr. Goodman, is that he's a passionate believer and advocate for academic freedoms. He received one of his many doctorates for his work in helping rescue threatened scholars around the world. And post 9/11, he has been at the forefront of fighting to remove barriers to the movement of scholars and students in and out of the United States. To quote Dr. Goodman, academic freedoms are among the most basic of our liberties, and it is important that we remain able to share these freedoms with the rest of the world. Those who come from societies that are less open and democratic gain a tremendous appreciation for the freedoms that they experience here and help us to better appreciate values that are often taken for granted. It is indeed an honor to welcome you here at the Lee Kuan Yew School. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Allan Goodman. Thank you very much. Thank you. floor is yours.
Since I think you need the microphone, I'll sit, so I hope that will create the conditions under which we can have a real dialogue after I finish my remarks. I'm very grateful to Joe for reminding me what the real job of any dean is. I only wished I had realized when I was a dean that being a plumber would be very useful. I'd like to also keep within the tradition of the Lake Kuan Yew School and begin with my own apology. I normally speak about the future of international educational exchange and how the world in which we live educationally is becoming flat. And I usually begin with my flat world story by telling an incident that occurred to me on my last visit to the Lake Kuan Yew School. I came up to the main lobby, and out of the doors, as the glass parted, a young woman said, "Professor Goodman, do you remember me?" And I said, "Actually, I do." She was a journalist in Vietnam and interviewed me for the electronic journal of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Vietnam, and the subject was international educational exchange. What I remember about the interview most was at the end of the interview, she said, "I want to ask you one more question. Where should I go to graduate school?" And I said, "Well, where were you thinking of going to graduate school?" And she mentioned the usual suspects, and I said, "You know, there's a new school formed in Singapore that really is terrific. It's got a new, very thoughtful dean. You ought to think about the Lake Kuan Yew School." 18 months later, she was your student. So from editing an electronic journal for the Central Committee of Communist Party, she arrived as your student here, met me on the stairs, and I said, "How are things going?" And she said, "Terrific. I'm having a great first year, and I've applied to take my second year at Columbia's School for Public and International Affairs in New York." So if the world could be any flatter than that, I don't know how we could achieve it. Regrettably, I apologize that that is not the subject of my talk this afternoon. I also usually talk about the exchange of students and the circulation of elites in the student and scholarly world, and particularly the flow of students to and from America. We will release on Monday the latest census called Open Doors, which will show the students and scholars coming to America and Americans studying other countries. It will be available to all of you on our website at iie.org, and the data is embargoed until Monday, so I have to apologize for not being able to speak about that. The rest of the apologies will appear self-evident from my talk. About a year ago, I took out an index card and wrote down the 6 things that I thought would determine this election we're now discussing and what would drive the campaign in the intervening 12 months. And of those 6 things, I'd like to discuss 5 of them with you today. It's pretty simple to remember. I want to talk, first of all, about ballots. Then I want to talk about billion, backyard, Bradley, and Boo. So we begin with the ballots. You know, we've had some difficulty in our electoral system counting votes. And I began to be concerned more than a year ago about our ability to do that effectively in a system where many more voters would be registered than ever before, and where many of our people for the first time would have the chance to vote early. In fact, close to 40% of America voted before Election Day through various systems of absentee ballots. I have here an absentee ballot. And first I have to tell you that this is not my ballot. I did vote absentee in the District of Columbia. This is the ballot of a staff member at the Institute who was traveling during Election Day and applied for an absentee ballot. He was a resident of Maryland. In the process of moving from Maryland, living temporarily in Virginia to end up domiciled in the District of Columbia. So he wrote the election board in Maryland to say he was moving, to cease listing him on the polls, mentioned that he was moving temporarily to Virginia and then would be a resident of the district, and he wrote the District of Columbia for an absentee ballot. He received by return mail an absentee ballot for Maryland, an absentee ballot for Virginia, and 2 absentee ballots for the District of Columbia, of which this is one. He used the other to vote. Both of the D.C. ballots were addressed to him in his full name at his complete local address. There was no discrepancy or typographical error between the two. Writ large, that is a problem with our system, and especially a problem when you think of the fact that 30 to 40% of voters voted before Election Day. 40% of Florida voted before Election Day. You may know about the United States that the average age of a citizen in Florida is about 103. So if Election Day is November 4th and you vote on October 15th and because of natural causes you die, before Election Day, does your vote count? I still don't know the answer to that. And who counts the votes? So I looked at my ballot. This is his ballot, but I looked at the ballot that I got. And I've been voting in the District of Columbia for a number of years. And the first thing that struck me about the ballot and its instructions that I have never seen before is that half of it's in Spanish. Now, the official language of the United States is English. We are not a bilingual country. Most Americans only speak one language. Some only speak Spanish. Many speak English. And never before have I seen a ballot in my home precinct that had 2 languages. This tells me that we were dealing with a very growing and sizable opportunity to register more and more voters to vote in this election. And some states had English and Spanish, some just English. But that's the way it is, and that was something new in our election, the registration of so many new voters, especially those whose first language may not be English. This is the actual absentee ballot. It's very high-tech. You are to take a pencil. It has to be a certain quality pencil. And between this arrow and this end of the arrow, you have to fill in a blank so that there is a complete blackened arrow of who you would vote for. 87 people ran for President of the United States this time. We usually have about that many. In the District of Columbia, we only had 4 parties running for election, and each of us got an opportunity to vote for one. Further down, we're able to vote for the delegate to the House of Representatives, who, for as long as I can remember, has been Eleanor Holmes Norton. Because the District of Columbia is not a state, it does not have senators and congressmen, and it has a delegate, but the delegate can't vote. Nevertheless, we vote for the delegate, and the delegate has an office. What struck me odd about the ballot is, for the first time, we were also asked to vote for a United States senator from the District of Columbia and a United States representative. And there are 4 or 5 names here of people I have never heard of before, 4 offices that I had never realized we exist for the District of Columbia, which is known in America as the single piece of territory surrounded on all 4 sides by reality. So even a hardened political junkie and political scientist like myself learned something from the balloting process. I did have a question. though, about turnout. I wanted to see if we would have a record turnout, and I also wanted to see if we would have more people voting than own stock. The economy is a big issue, as you know. It usually is in most elections, and about 60% of Americans own stock. The last time 60% of registered voters in America voted was in 1968. And the only elections in which we've had people vote 60% or more was the election of 1960, 64, and 68. The average turnout most of the time is 52% or less. You all know by now that 62% or so of the population, depending on all the absentee ballots, 62% of the registered voters voted. We've never had a turnout that high before. It's not a high turnout. Most countries that have elections have a much higher turnout. And I would have thought in this election, with the economy as important as it is, and with such stark choices, the turnout would have been higher than 62%, and in fact it didn't turn out to be. We will spend, as political scientists now, many, many years analyzing who voted, what their demographic and socioeconomic characteristics are. But it tells me, the total turnout number tells me, even in a very contested election in which there are very stark choices, about 40% of those in America who can vote choose not to vote. And that is a political statement of some sort. So on my little index card, I thought a lot of this election was going to depend on the mechanics of balloting, on the registration of voters, on the degree to which absentee ballots would be counted or not counted, and the mechanics. So when your dean and I thought about what topic I ought to speak on, and we talked about the mobility of students and scholars or scholar rescue issues, we decided on the election because it was close. And then he said, do you think we'll know the result of the election by the time you speak at the Kuan School in Singapore? And that hasn't always, we don't usually always know immediately after the voting, as you well know. And in fact, the election is not over. We do not elect the President of the United States directly, so the vote on November 4th is not the final act. On the 15th of December, each elector of the states meets in their state to cast their votes for President and Vice President of the United States. And the election ain't even over then, because in early January, the Congress and the Senate have to reconvene to ratify the results of the electors on December 15th. So your dean was right. The election isn't quite over, though I think it's safe to say that Obama won. Billion was the next word I wrote on my forecast, and I turned out to be off by about 100%. Of course.
Thank you. I don't like to.
And a glass?
Thank you. Thank you.
So, all of us about a year ago estimated this would be about the most expensive election in American history, and that probably one or both of the candidates would not receive or ask for public funding. None of us imagined that it would cost $1 billion, which means we missed the internet. We missed the ability of the internet to raise thousands and tens of thousands of small donations over and over and over again. And I have to tell you, it was really quite exciting. I get about 200 emails a day in my capacity at the Institute. Probably 50 of them came from John McCain, Barack Obama, people running their campaigns, Dear Allan. It was an amazing thing to see, but we were all wrong. the amount of money raised and the cost of the election was not $1 billion, it was $2 billion, and maybe even a little bit more than that. Now, that money went to advertising. In a 3-week period, Barack Obama and his advertising played on the battleground states 140,000 times. That is a lot of commercials, even for somebody who is a political junkie, but it made a difference. So this was an unprecedented experience for us to see so much money raised from so many sources through the internet, and the cost of the election skyrocket to $2.5 billion. The third thing I wrote on my guide to the future was backyard. Elections in America and maybe around the world are won based on the issues that matter in somebody's backyard. Matters on what happens to people when they wake up in the morning and think about their home, their family. And I was pretty sure a year ago that Iraq was not going to be an issue. I was pretty sure that most elections are never decided by foreign policy issues. So even though my preference would be for foreign policy to play a larger role, I was pretty sure that we were going to choose our president based on some pretty localized concerns. Healthcare, Children's Health Initiative, education, our aging infrastructure, the security of people's jobs. I turned out to be partially right. It was the economy that mattered, but none of us would have forecast that in 12 months the value of our retirement funds would have declined by $2 trillion. And none of us would have forecast that in September anybody that held stock in America probably saw a 30% decline. 60% of our people own stock. The economy matters when the stock market goes way down. We depend on a little bit of Social Security for retirement and a lot on our 401ks. And the backyard issue turned out to be the economic meltdown that has affected and hurt all of the world. But it did remind me that we vote based on very, very localized concerns. The fourth thing I wrote down was Bradley. This was a shorthand for making all of us think about the impact of race on American politics. Bradley was a very popular mayor in Los Angeles in 1982. He went into a gubernatorial campaign in California against George Duke Majan with a very, very large lead, 12, 13-point lead, and he lost. All the polls said that Bradley would win that election. He was a very popular mayor of Los Angeles. None of the polls forecast that Duke Majan would win. So the conclusion is, A, that race mattered, and B, people lied to the polls. Well, as a political scientist, I can assure you people lie to the polls. So that hasn't probably changed, but apparently this time they didn't lie as much. But Bradley lost actually not because of race, and that was the first myth that I began to uncover about how race and elections mix. Bradley, not unsurprisingly, as a mayor of Los Angeles, favored a very strict gun control measure that had just been introduced into the state legislature. His opponent did not favor a gun control measure. And the conservative Republican Party in California made a huge effort to get absentee ballots based on the gun control issue, and we now believe that is why Bradley lost, not because he was the black mayor of Los Angeles, but because he favored gun control. There is race in other elections, and maybe the one that was closest to what might have forecast the outcome here was the election for the governor of Virginia when Doug Wilder was elected. He was favored to win the election that year by about a 12-point lead in the polls, and he won the election by about 1%. And it was that disparity that gave political scientists the first hint that people lie to the polls, and they certainly lie to the polls when race is involved. There wasn't an impact of race on this election. It doesn't measure up in any of the data or any of the polls. I'm sure it's there, but it's not there in anywhere, way, shape, or form, or to the degree that it might have been reasonable to think based on the experience of Governor Wilder in his election and the mistaken belief that there is a Bradley effect. So race really didn't drive this election. The fifth thing I wrote down was the word boo. That stands for the October surprise. Most American presidential elections in the month of October, there is some surprising event abroad or some surprising action at home that the president or the incumbent or a foreign leader takes that changes part of the dynamic of why people vote and who they vote for. Probably all of us had in mind, and a frequent visitor to this school, Joe Nye, said it best in a Financial Times article when he said, "We are thinking that the October surprise will be an attack by Osama bin Laden on U.S. forces somewhere in the world or inside the United States or on a key American ally." We did have an October surprise. It occurred in September. It was the financial meltdown. It begins with the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers, then the problems that Merrill Lynch faced, its acquisition by Bank of America, the wild volatility of the stock market. And that probably was the September-October surprise that deeply affected the outcome of this election and how people determined what they would vote for and when they'd vote. Now, I said there were 6 things on the card that I wrote about a year ago, a year before the election. And I might appear, with respect to my 5, that I was quite confident that they would affect the election. I've just now revealed that I was off by a factor of 100% when it comes to money. I don't believe that race was a factor. It may have been an issue. I was worried about the balloting. I thought we would be counting absentee ballots of dead people for many, many weeks after the election, so this talk would have been very timely. The 6th thing I wrote on the card was who I was absolutely convinced would be the nominees of both parties, Hillary Rodham Clinton and Rudolph Giuliani. And I think most political analysts would have said a year before the election that it is almost inconceivable that those 2 political powerhouses, the hero of 9/11, America's mayor he was called, or Hillary Rodham Clinton and her husband would not end up as the candidates. So it teaches me that maybe I'm best placed to work as a plumber in academic administration or to discuss things I really know about, which is the flow of students and scholars around the world. A final apology is that I think it's important for just a minute to talk about the period ahead. And I'm going to state very confidently some thoughts about the transition, and I may be as right about them or as wrong about them as I was about the election. A couple of things impressed me about Obama's presidency and the period ahead. One is that this is not 1932. And that's really important for America. We face many enemies in the world, And we face many regimes that are acquiring weapons or aiding or helping terrorists that hurt us all. But we don't face Hitler. We don't face the rise of Nazism. We don't face the forced migration of whole peoples based on their religion or their ethnicity in Central and Eastern Europe. We don't face 25% unemployment. We don't face mass hunger in our country. We don't face breadlines. And it's really important to keep that in perspective, because as bad as the crisis now appears and as deeply as it may affect our personal security, our individual wealth holdings, or what happens next, it's not a crisis yet that has the political, military, and economic dimensions of the greatest crisis we ever faced, which led to the presidency of Franklin Roosevelt. We also were blessed in this election that come January 20th, at noon, everybody who ran in the election will still have a job. Sarah Palin will be governor of one of the wealthiest states in America. Her annual budget is larger than many countries. She and her people sit on huge reserves. They may or may not be drilled. They may or may not effectively get to market. But she will still be governor of a state, and she may or may not be the heir apparent for the next time the Republicans get to choose a candidate 4 years or 2 years or 3 years from now, depending on how soon the race for the next White House election starts. John McCain is a genuine American hero, a popular person in Congress, a real builder of coalitions between on key issues. He returns to Congress. He has the capacity to make some of the Obama agenda work or not work. But he will be there voting on the very issues about which he ran and he cares. Senator Biden will lose his Senate seat, but he will become Vice President of the United States, and Senator Obama will lose his Senate seat. But all of the people who ran for this hotly contested election with such stark differences will be on the national scene and will have the capacity to make a difference. Third point I want to make is that most political scientists will say there are two dimensions of transition. One is about picking the right people, and the other is about picking the right policies. And most of the time, the transition is about the former rather than the latter. There are approximately 3,000 positions in the federal government that are subject to political appointment. Cabinet secretaries, deputy secretaries, ambassadors, office directors. There's a very large range, and they are very, very influential. And most of the time, most of the transition is focused on figuring out not who will be Secretary of State or who will be Secretary of Defense. That's rather easy. It's the hundreds of other positions in all of the cabinet agencies that the president can appoint that really will fulfill his or her agenda. And that seems to be, in the past, the work of the transition, which means that policy gets picked January, February. The U.S. budget is submitted to Congress in February. It's made up by the former president, so nothing much changes. And it takes a year, 18 months for a new government to actually be formed and govern. That may happen. I wouldn't bet on it. I think the transition this time may be about as much policy as people, which means that the 100 days we all focus on ever since it was applied to the presidency of Franklin Roosevelt, the 100 days to deal with the economic crisis of 1932, to create the New Deal. The 100 days may begin November 5th, not January 20th. And we all may have a chance to see what an Obama administration means for our economic situation in the world, our domestic issues, and some international issues. So every sign that I can see of his activity in the past week suggests that he is going to start now, and policies will be picked as well as people. And that will make this transition different. There are 70 days from now till the inauguration, and then there are 30 days in which to complete the first 100 days. And we may be in store for a much richer time, a much more decisive time, and the times demand that. Of course, everything depends on not how good a candidate Obama or McCain were, but how good a president they are. What is their capacity to lead our country and to lead in the world that we share? And a few months before his death, I found myself on the airplane with Tim Russert, the NBC News Meet the Press correspondent who died so suddenly. He asked me what I did. I knew what he did. I said, "Do you want to see our latest data?" He looked at it, and then we began talking about the presidency. And I said, "Who do you think has the capacity to be, in this election, a really great president?" And he said, "Well, of course, the times will tell." But he then told me a story about the funeral of Franklin Roosevelt. And I think this was his way of, by an allegory, telling me about what we all should look for. The funeral cortege went from the Capitol down Pennsylvania Avenue to Arlington, well, to the train which would carry Roosevelt's coffin to Hyde Park. And a man in the crowd was weeping rather profusely. And a reporter next to the man said, "I'm so struck at how sad you are. Did you know President Roosevelt?" And the man, an African American, replied, "No, he knew me." Obama has proven as a candidate that he is the kind of campaigner that knows us. And the us is not just America, it's the world. The real test of any president is whether they can be a president about which people will say, "He knows me. He knows what I'm worried about. And he knows how to fix it." And those will be the issues which determine our country and the world we share. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you, Allan, for a very interesting talk. It's now time for Q&A. I'm going to use the chair's prerogative to ask the first question, but before I do so, just some ground rules. Please use the microphones that are spread out around the room to ask your question. Introduce yourselves, please, and if possible, do limit yourselves to one question each, so that we can allow as many people as possible to ask questions. My question to you, Allan, is as an American, as a political scientist, as a political junkie, as you put it, how surprised were you at the global reaction to Obama's victory?
I wasn't surprised at his global popularity, and I imagine that if, for example, Sarah Palin had met with every woman leader of another country, the way she took the media by storm, she might also appear very popular abroad. 70 million Americans watched the vice presidential debate. That's twice as many as watched the president's debate. 14 million Americans watched Sarah Palin on Saturday Night Live. It set a record for that television show. The last time that many people watched it was in 1994, I think. So it wasn't inconceivable to me that in some circumstances we had a group of candidates, Obama, Biden, McCain, Palin, who would be popular globally, but they would also be unpopular for their policies. And I asked a lot of German students who were at the speech in Berlin, were you surprised at how many people came out? And their answer was unqualifiedly yes. So I think he was something quite different at a time when people wanted to hear something different from America. And the two blended together. So I wasn't surprised at his popularity. Whether he will remain popular, of course, depends on what tests he faces, when and if he has to use military force, who he appoints to the United Nations as our ambassador, whether that person is brought back into the president's cabinet as a sign that the United Nations is important again. So it could be a very short-lived thing. I don't think it will be, but for what I saw, I was not surprised.
Thank you. Can I start over there, please? And then I'll come to you.
My name is Henriette Litter. I'm a PhD student from Germany. And out of curiosity, I have a question concerning your real research topic, education, that many of my friends during the Bush administration years said they did not want to go to the US to study because they do not approve of the policies. Do you think that now with Obama, many more students worldwide, not only from Germany but from other countries, will then start a new run to go to educational institutions in the US to be part of it or study there because the atmosphere will be any different? Thank you.
Yes. Were you in Berlin? Did you see Obama? I hope you'll have the chance to share your impression of that speech and his continued popularity in your country with your classmates. At the Institute, we're already seeing huge increases in applications. Fulbright is at its highest application rate in history. We're getting calls daily from students from abroad who now have changed the study abroad plan, would like to explore coming to America. The website, Education USA Today, which is maintained by the State Department, which gives free educational advice on how to pick a school in America, what the system is. As you know, it's so confusing and decentralized, how to get financial aid, have record numbers of hits. So I think there is a renewed interest. But you asked me about my research. My research also tells me that people pick their education destination based on the quality of the schools, the quality of the faculty, the capacity of the country or the program to absorb them, which I think is a very good thing for the world. It helps the Lee Kuan Yew School here in Singapore, and it should. It helps schools in America. So we may see huge increases, but it may be as a result of demographic pressure as much as popularity. A third of all institutions of higher education in the whole world are in the United States. We have last year about 583,000 students. On Monday you can find out the new number. Those 580,000 students go to just 150 schools in America. We have 4,000 accredited colleges and universities. And as people need capacity, as more countries produce young people who cannot find a place in their public university, they will look to countries that have capacity. So I expect there will be a big increase. It will be an Obama effect, but it will also be a demographic effect and an effect because we have the capacity that few other countries have.
Hi, good afternoon, Dr. Allan Goodman. Thanks for the water. And my question is, before I ask my question, my name is Ace Kindred Cheong here. My question is, I hope I will not offend anybody by asking this question. Is that, do you believe that in the future, America will have a first woman president? My purpose of asking this question is because, as we know, the president of the United States of America is the most powerful person, and now in the history it's all men. And do you think the American will be open-minded in the future to accept a woman? Because if that happens, the social status will change, because women in general is considered as the weaker sex, you know. And imagine if America have a woman president, what would America as a whole think of that? Thank you.
I'm surprised we haven't a woman president already. I think we've come very close. I think gender is not. I think we will discover in time, and even in the contest between Obama and Clinton, that neither race nor gender were as big a set of issues as we thought. Maybe the biggest issue in her case was Bill, not her. And I do think that young people, 18 million people in the primaries voted for Hillary Clinton. Many young people. I think when we do the research, we'll see that the profile of the young voter was pretty much the same as the Obama voter, and it was a very close primary contest. Many more young women and older women in America are empowered, and I think it's only a matter of time before we will see that happen. Now, you said something else that's very important, and that the American president is the most powerful. I think it's better to say that presidents of countries are powerful, and presidents of big countries may be more powerful than others. But the real lesson of this century and a good part of the last century is that no country can do it alone. And a really powerful president is going to be one that works with other countries, that respects and listens to other countries, that builds alliances and coalitions, that invests in international institutions. And it means that it could come from a variety of different countries and leaderships. For Americans, it's really important for us to think about the fact that we share the world, and that because our share of resources may be great, it doesn't give us authority over it. And I think it's better to think of the American presidency that way than to think in terms of their sheer hard or soft power.
Thank you. Gentleman with the apple, and then over here, and then the gentleman in the back.
I think he's probably scared about those limitations and pressures as well. You think about the issues he has to deal with, and again, I'm just speaking in a purely personal capacity, and none of us really know what he is going to do, and we won't even know into this week some of his key appointments. But think of the problems he's got to deal with. There is the financial crisis. Who understands it? You're probably going to, you could take a whole course at this school and still not exactly understand how could we get from mortgages to mortgage-backed securities to things that nobody knows what their value is and melt down the whole world. So it'll be very important for him to understand what he can't do, what he can't fix. Secondly, it will be very important to determine how much government should regulate. And American history is a constant pendulum swing between completely free enterprise, which leads to crisis, and overregulation. To do that, if we're going to regulate anything, it requires the agreement of Congress. It will be tested in the courts. So it will be difficult to fix that problem. Then we have Iraq. Both candidates were committed to America not remaining in Iraq for a long time. The Iraqis appeared to be really committed to getting America out of Iraq. They probably will change now. And it will create a very large test. Do we do what we said in the campaign, or do we take account of new realities? And if you pick all of the issues that he talked about and the other candidates talked about, they're huge pressures, but the key will be figuring out what the president can actually do, and do those quickly, because the objective economically is to restore trust and confidence. And to not pick those things which are impossible to do, or if something can be done about them, have to be done in concert. In your papers yesterday and today, there was a call for a new Bretton Woods convention. That's probably the right thing to do, but it takes more than one president. It takes more than one country to make that happen. So I think his policy steps are bound to be constrained. They're going to be measured. And they may be different than Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. Roosevelt decided against all advice to do a lot of things all at once. The prevailing wisdom was just what I said: tackle one issue at a time, bring the courts along. And Roosevelt had the insight that the problem we faced, which was much graver, and he didn't know what was going to work and what was going to work, but he knew he had to get a lot of things working to restore trust and confidence, to restore hope. I think we're in a different situation, so I think either of the candidates being elected would have pursued a much more measured approach and a measured strategy, and barring some global catastrophe, I think they will.
My name is Michael Stephen. I'm an American also, and I have to say that your multiple ballots reminded me of the old Chicago adage: vote early and vote often. But perhaps my question is really a follow-on to the previous one. Given all of these daunting challenges, and there may be more lying in the weeds out there that we don't even know about, yet it seems to me that one of the greatest challenges to Obama is managing expectations, not only within the United States among his supporters, but also, as we've noted, around the world. What advice would you give the new president on that regard?
I hope he and anyone elected would take some lessons from Franklin Roosevelt's approach and the direct ability to explain to people. I guess what made him so famous in the fireside chats is he rejected all of the drafts by his speechwriters, which were up here, and he said, I want to pick a problem, I want to explain it in the way that Joe the plumber or Stavros the dean can understand it.
Bob the builder.
I want to explain it in a way, and then I want to explain what I think is a solution that can help. Don't know if it'll work, but we'll try. Obama has a fabulous ability to communicate, and I hope he will put it to that use for domestic issues as well as international issues. I think you all were up perhaps listening to his acceptance speech. It was the first time I remember an acceptance speech by an American president-elect that had an explicit sentence addressed to the world. And I hope he will address the world quite regularly, not assume that the world will figure out what we mean and he means by another speech he makes. So the ability to communicate, to understand the problem and put it in terms that an average person can understand, I think he has a gift at that. I think we need a gift at this time. I think that will be very important, and it will help temper expectations. Now, what I don't think, in contrast to 1932, is that at home we believe that any of this is going to get fixed tomorrow or in the first 100 days. I think the new administration will try very hard to do that, but the reality, the expectations, I think, are more realistic about what a new president can do than ever before.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chen. Thank you, Dr. Goodman. Would you please tell us in broad terms what would be the kaleidoscopic reconfiguration of the geopolitical pattern in relation to China in India during President Obama's tenure office? Thank you.
Well, I'm going to write down on a little card what my... I think first you'll have an administration that excels at communications, explanation, and engagement. I think this appears to be a new team that will reach out and want to reach out to countries. Look at how rapidly he's moved. As we speak, he's visiting the White House, that usually to see where he's going to live. That usually takes place 3 weeks later. He's spoken to the president of Poland, the president of Russia over the weekend, maybe half a dozen other countries, maybe more. And I think that maybe what we saw in the campaign will be part of his leadership as president, reaching out, getting the opinions, listening. And out of that will come perhaps a difference in our relationship with those two countries, and perhaps not. What all of us as Americans have to grapple with is, are we the only superpower? And if that's the case, and I'm not entirely sure it is, but if that's the case, do we have enough superpower to run the world, or do we have to manage it together through dialogue, diplomacy, use of force when necessary, but in concert with other countries and other people? And that will inevitably shape our attitude toward India and China. There is some talk that he will make an early trip to Indonesia. Not a bad choice. Fifth largest country in the world, world's largest Muslim country. To get to Indonesia, you got to go either through China or India. You got to get to this part of the world, and maybe that will happen, and maybe it won't. Maybe he'll be so preoccupied with domestic issues that he can't. But there's no question that we will think about China, India, and its leaders differently, and in the process think about our position in the world differently. Our Constitution foresees that there will be a struggle between the branches of government, and particularly the executive and the legislative, over power, including the power of the presidency. That struggle occurs when, in wartime, it occurs over very contentious issues, sometimes race, and each president has to determine where they think the line is. Each is also a product of their age, so the new president looks at the struggle to expand executive power under the Bush administration, looks at a different Congress, and may not have the instinct to push the envelope of executive power as far as President Bush felt he had to do. May not need to, because with a majority in Congress, there may not need to be a hugely expanded executive power because the two branches will see eye to eye on certain issues. So I think it will be an issue-by-issue case which will form what we later think of is, did he expand power? Did he contract it? Did he need to? Was his philosophy consistent with doing either?
Over here, please.
Thank you, Dr. Goodman. It's interesting to hear from you that Obama knows us. He knows us. You in your statement, you said that he is a person who knows anyone. Well, as Obama has a Kenyan natural father, he has an Indonesian stepfather, and as well as he has, aside as he has an American mother. Do you think that this background will ultimately give some significant attitude of Obama towards how he sees Africa and Asia? Thank you.
So can you just introduce yourself?
Okay, sorry. I'm Kemal Haripurwanto from the Indonesian Embassy. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I think background probably matters, but no one would have thought that Roosevelt's background, a member of the elite, a person stricken by a physical disability after the disease of polio, nobody would have thought he would have identified with, at that time, the common man or the common person, or in a country at that time that, like ours, was so isolationist that he would end up being so internationalist. So background matters. It doesn't determine everything. What matters a lot is this magic of communication, this ability to speak to a crowd. First, that a crowd wants to hear it, but somehow you don't keep getting crowds if you don't connect in some way. And some of our presidents have had that very much, and that has helped them lead and helped them explain what we're doing. And I think that communication capacity he has is really unparalleled, and it gives him the ability to explain his agenda to us, to the people of your country, and throughout the world that we share. How many here have actually seen him in person? We have a woman in Germany in the back. If you hear him in person, there is something very magnetic about it. You want to listen. I also found speeches by Senator McCain, Senator Biden, Governor Palin. Somehow I was drawn into them. Maybe because the issues were so grave, maybe because the differences were so stark. But all four of them possess an ability to communicate that I'm sure will serve their presidency well.
Over here, and then we have a question back there.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Goodman. Very good presentation. I am actually one of the U.S. citizens here in this room. I didn't have any of the problems. My ballot got all the way from Texas to Singapore. This one exactly that I wanted. But going back to 2012 and come up with the 5 forecasts, hopefully better than what you did this time, what would be the 5 or 6 predictors that you would give us with, and then we'll ask you next time when you come here.
Well, one thing I didn't.
Progress, so it won't be one time. Over the next 4 years, we'll give asking you.
I'm pretty sure billions would be on the list. I didn't have on my list blogs and the power of the internet in general. I think that will be on the list. I think gender may very much be on the list, the way race was an issue for us. So much for 2012 depends on what happens in this month, 2009, 2010. The challenges that the president makes for himself, the challenges that others make for him. So it's a little too early to tell, but I am struck with this election. Usually we have about 15 months of election. This time it felt like we had 15 years. And it suggests to me that we're going to start much earlier, that we'll be evaluating candidates much earlier. If there is a wildly popular incumbent, then maybe not, but if there's a controversial incumbent or an incumbent that makes some mistakes, has some successes and has some failures, that the contest will be will start a lot earlier, and there'll be more money available for it, apparently. So I think it's just a little too early to tell, but there are things I'd put on that card today that I wouldn't have imagined putting on the card a year, 15 months ago.
Can you see a Sarah Palin versus Hillary Clinton in terms of the gender angle? And then I'll check out this one photo. Based on where you are right now, and because you mentioned gender as one of the factors in your list.
I do think I'm married to a woman. It's not a requirement. I have a daughter who is a professional. They're half of the American population, maybe a little bit more than half. When Senator Clinton ran, there was something about this time. Obama was magic. For many, McCain was magic. And for many, Hillary Clinton was magic, because there has to be a time when the time has come. Women didn't have a right to vote in our country till the 1920s. Imagine that. Imagine when my wife went to law school at Harvard, there were less than 10% of her class. I think there were 10 women in the whole class. My daughter's a doctor. Had she gone to medical school 20 years ago, she'd be the only woman at the College of Physicians and Surgeons at Columbia. There is a lot of pent-up change that is only happening now, and Clinton's candidacy expressed that. And so you're right, I'd put gender on that card. I don't know who the exemplar would be. A lot of people say that Hillary Clinton will be too old by then. Now, who would have thought that we would be seriously voting for John McCain or against John McCain? So age, which you would have put on the card a while ago, maybe isn't so relevant. Will Hillary Clinton become the next Supreme Court justice? And will that take her out of national politics, or at least electoral politics? That could affect things. And if she were made Supreme Court justice, would that satisfy, for a time, half or more of our population who feels it's time for their turn to come? I don't know, but it is a powerful force that she unlocked. And our society is still a work in progress with respect to equality between races and also equality between gender.
Okay, there are a few more questions in the audience.
1, 2, 3, and 4 in the back there.
My name is Amrita. I work as a research assistant here at the school. I found your insights on the Bradley effect very interesting, relating it to gun ownership. I was wondering, we also heard something called the reverse Bradley effect in this election, the concept of a white person saying that they'd vote for a black person, and when they go in to vote, they wouldn't do that. I was curious to know what your views on the reverse Bradley effect were.
Apparently, Senator Obama received more votes from white men than Bill Clinton did when Bill Clinton ran for president twice and won. I certainly think it causes us to rethink, just as the gender issue causes us to think anew about this as a potent force in politics. As political scientists, we need to think differently about race. Now, I looked up the statistics of the composition of our population. About 4% of America is Asian American. About 13% are African American. 15% are Hispanic American. We haven't even begun to have a conversation about what that means. There are some states that are projected within a decade where African American, Hispanic American, Asian American together will be the majority. We need to have that conversation with ourselves about what it means to live in a multicultural society. What does it mean when the fastest growing religion in America is Islam? What does it mean when the fastest growing ethnic group in America is Hispanic America? What does it mean when our voting material is in Spanish? What does it mean when you get your phone bill? And there are 8 languages, Vietnamese, Spanish, Chinese, Korean. I can't believe it. So our whole society is changing in this respect, and I think we're only at the beginning of understanding what it means for us, and then will it make a difference in the world? It's bound to, but I don't know what.
Thank you, Dr. Goodman. My name is Saroz, and I almost spent 4 years in Hyde Park near Roosevelt's house, actually, and it's pretty interesting you compare him with Roosevelt. Today, I think there was an article comparing Obama either with Roosevelt or Jimmy Carter. And regarding, my question is related to Republican Party today. Regarding the fact that almost more than 60% of college graduates went for Obama, and a higher, similar proportion of people with a postgraduate degree are supporting Obama, whereas Republican base seem to be concentrated on South Beltway of white America. What's the future for Republican Party? Are we sort of seeing one-party domination for a period amount of time in America? What can we learn from this experience?
I think for the next week we're probably seeing one-party domination in, and it's clear the Republican Party needs to rethink its message to America, its message to future candidates, the degree to which it embraces gender, for example. And it happens in our multi-party system. We have only 2 main parties, but that means we have to embrace things that in many other countries, in Germany there's a strong Green Party. One of the candidates for president here is from a Green Party. I didn't know we had one, let alone that they were on the ballot. So the Republican Party is going to have to rethink what it's going to do, what it's going to embrace. Probably the base of rethinking of that will be what it does in the legislature. What are the new Republicans and the old Republicans going to do about the problems we face today? Will they join with Obama? Will they not? Will McCain play a role in doing that? So I think you'll see a different Republican Party for sure 4 and 8 years from now. And you'll also see a different Democrat Party, partly generated by the statistics you cited and the new people that are voting, partly generated by the issues that the president faces and deals with, and partly generated by its sense of itself. Is it the party of the common man? Is any party just the party of the common man? And when you say that, you are forgetting the common woman. So when do we embrace both? And I think it's surprising to me how, in one sense, established our country and its system is, and how disestablished it is. It's changing all the time, from its voting system and mechanisms to what it means to have these political parties.
My name is Tian Sang. Professor Goodman, would Obama aim in the same direction as John Kennedy or Martin Luther King's? And how willing is the upper elite willing to accept a black family, giving them instructions? He was called a terrorist, and people, some of them are so, burned in the mind, thinking that he is of a terrorist organization. Terrorist organizations. If there is such an event, unfortunately, what would be the consequence?
Obama said a few times that he was a man running for president who happened to be black, as opposed to a black man running for president. As I said earlier, am surprised at how little race mattered. I was reading a New York Times poll preparing for this talk. 46% of Americans got Obama's religion wrong. I think, despite that, we so badly wanted an election and a president and a different administration, a new administration, whether it was McCain or Obama, that people were prepared to accept either. And when people said Sarah Palin is just a heartbeat away from the presidency, McCain's an old guy, you might have thought that, well, if he got elected, would we have trouble taking leadership from somebody that old, or somebody who was a prisoner of war, or somebody who believed more in the use of force than maybe somebody else. But I think this election dissolved that. Neither race, maybe gender still plays, but neither race nor age matter. What matters is what the president is going to do. And what we found in the campaign, I think everybody found somebody like that Roosevelt, somebody who seemed to know them. Because this election was not a landslide in the popular vote. And we've had elections that have been a landslide in the popular vote. So it wasn't even a landslide in the electoral vote. So McCain spoke to people, Palin spoke to people, as did Biden and Obama. And I think we saw, as a people, the outcome. We saw somebody who would lead us, and that's what people want, and that's what they'll be tested on. And now everybody measures themselves against the presidency of John F. Kennedy. If you look at the objective facts, Kennedy was a pretty weak president. Didn't achieve any of his legislative objectives. It was Lyndon Johnson, after Kennedy's assassination, who achieved the legislative objectives. Kennedy was a young president, tested early, failed, both with Khrushchev and with allowing the Bay of Pigs to go forward. He had an ability to communicate. He inspired the world. That, for sure, made a difference. But I don't think we're going to look back and say, is he a Kennedy? Is he? I think we're going to look at this president and say, can he deal with the problems that we have, that we're facing? Can he remain credible in the world? And will the tough things he has to do result in measurable improvement?
Take a last question from the back.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Goodman. Dr. Goodman, maybe I can call you President, because for me it's no opportunity to ask a question about President Obama. My question is about a good president. I want to know what are the criteria in American people's mind of a good president, because you already said Mr. Bush is not a nice one, but American people gave him twice opportunity, right? Then second question is that if you like, maybe you can give us some suggestion. How should we do if in the future we want to be a good president for all of us in the Lee Kuan School for students? Thank you very much.
Well, first, I hope that many of you in this school will graduate to become leaders of your country, members of your parliaments, finance ministers. It's very important that that the world's future leadership supply doesn't all look like me and didn't all go to Harvard. I think that's really critical. So I hope you have that aspiration. We're very ambivalent about what makes a good president. Every generation has a different view. There is now a view that Ronald Reagan was a great president. That wasn't the view when he left office. It wasn't the view when he was president. For many years, history and political scientists felt the worst president we probably had in modern times was Harry Truman. Now, it seems history has changed its mind. So any person's opinion of what makes a good president, I think, depends on the circumstances they face and how they face them. And if you just start there, are they clear about the circumstances we face? How do they face them? Can they lead people more than themselves to work out a solution? I think that begins to tell us circumstances matter a lot, leadership matters a lot, building coalitions matters a lot. Vision probably is also important. Now that's different than saying it's time for a change. Vision is saying this is where I'd like us to be. This is why I'd like us to be there. This is how we can get there. And we're going to hear a lot about that. And that will help us form a judgment. So I think a second quality is vision. And a third is, and I think very relevant for this school and for students in your programs, is the great presidents in America picked people in their cabinet and in high positions for their quality, and not because they were party loyalists or they necessarily agreed with them. And the tradition begins with Lincoln. Most of Lincoln's cabinet hated him, and most of Lincoln's cabinet were his political enemies, and some ran against him for office. But he felt with each of the persons he picked, they had a quality that the country needed. And I think the quality of people who enter government is another way to judge. And the quality of people the president picks to join him in the government is another way to judge who will history think is a great president. So we've talked about leadership, in difficult circumstances, we've talked about vision, and we've also talked about the ability to pick people and listen to people that are best for the country, not best for yourself. I've had a little bit of time to work around a president in a White House. And it's stunning to me how quickly isolated you become as president from your own people, from reality. The great presidents break out of that isolation and they search for alternative views. They make sure they're hearing all the alternative views. So in the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy becomes a great leader because he forces alternative views to come out of his cabinet and national security advisors who initially wanted to bomb Cuba. But it was Kennedy intervening at the right moments to get a different set of options. So that capacity is what makes presidents great, and it's going to take people like you in this school to make your presidents great and your countries great. So I hope you will do public service, and I hope you will become leaders of your country and work with mine.
Thank you.
I was going to say that it remains for me to thank you, Allan, for a very interesting talk and tremendous dialogue with our audience. As you can see, there's a lot of interest in what happens in the United States, despite the fact that we are, according to our dean, living in the new Asian hemisphere. We still care what's happening in the old Western hemisphere. And I hope it won't be until 2012 when we have the pleasure of welcoming you back. Thank you again.